Day of November, November 30th, 2023, as we welcome you in to Fantasy Football Night in America right here exclusively on the Better Sports Network. Welcome in. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. I am Eric Balkman. You know me from the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, the Fantasy Football Players Championship, the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, and of course, this show that we do each and every week from 7 until 9 here on BSN. So glad to have you aboard tonight, hanging out. I know there's going to be a ton of start-sit questions. We'll try to get to as many as we can tonight. It's going to be a lot of fun. And what we'll do is we'll broadcast the show. It will go right into Thursday Night Football. You can watch the first quarter with us and then enjoy it on the Bettercast for the remainder of the program tonight, or for the remainder of the game tonight. It's going to be a lot of fun. Hi, how are you? I'm Eric Balkman at Eric Balkman on the X Machine. Let's welcome in our guest co-host this evening. He's been on this show before. You know him from Roto World at RotoWorld_FB on the X, and of course at ZK_FFB on the X Machine as well. It is the incomparable Zachary Kruger. Zach, welcome in, man. So glad to have you aboard tonight.
What's up, Eric? Happy to be on here with you. I can't remember when we did this last year, but I figured it was about this time last year, maybe, when we did it, or was it during the summertime? It's been a little bit, but I remember having a great show with you last time. I really enjoyed being on. Great host, and we're in it for the long haul too. I mean, 2-hour show, so we've got a lot of ball to talk in the upcoming few hours. So looking forward to chatting up with you a little bit, and thank you for reminding me about turning on Thursday Night Football. I'm actively working on that as we speak. So I can also watch the first quarter with you guys. But happy to be on here. Looking forward to speaking with you guys for a bit.
It's going to be a lot of fun. I have to ask you too, Zach. Would you say? I think I would say like your expertise is probably best ball, right?
Yeah. That's still kind of what I like to dabble in with the most. Still did a lot of drafts, this year. Not a lot of underdog. Underdog has, been kind of the trendy one for the last few years. I still like underdog, but and I guess it's fitting that I'm sitting on here on what this is a FFPC associated stream, and FFPC was kind of what I went a little bit more into this past year. I really do love the FFPC platform. I like the tight end premium scoring that they have there. Certainly the best ball contest, so $125 entries. So I kind of did fewer drafts at a higher cost, because the FFPC drafts, the 35s and the $125 entries, they run it up a little bit more than what I can get over on Underdog. But I like the format, and I think it's worth playing on. So I did fewer drafts at a higher rate, hoping to walk away with a little bit of plus EV when all is said and done here. But big FFPC fan here. So
good. I'm glad to hear that. Y'all. That's fantastic, Zach. And I always wondered too, with like guys like you who focus on best ball so much during the season, what are you doing as far as like, trying to prime the pump for next year? I mean, are you taking notes? How deep into the weeds are you getting? What does a best ball guy do during the season when, there's no lineup setting, there's no trading, there's no managing your teams? How do you sort of like, and I know you stay in the game. I mean, I read your stuff on Roto World all the time, but how do you sort of stay up? Like, what are you specifically looking at as the season goes on?
Yeah, so if I'm not pulling my hair out over tilting over, things just not breaking my way for any given reason. Luckily, it hasn't been too bad this year. But if I'm not doing that, I'm not a big physical note taker. I can, we have so much research available to us at any time. I'm constantly looking things up on Pro Football Focus, fantasypoints.com. They have a great data suite that I use a lot. So I know where I can find the data, where as far as like taking notes on things and opportunity shares and stuff like that, I'm going to have all of March and basically August through September even to look back at those things and see who got what when and how things even evolved over time. But I am taking mental notes and just kind of reevaluating maybe holes in my game or processes that I maybe either overlooked or ignored, or maybe I was too heavy on somebody early on. And I'm trying to figure out like, why did I buy into this when maybe there were signs there that I shouldn't have. So I'll give you an example of one hole in my game that I looked at and noticed, and I try to improve on it every year, and it seems like it just constantly continues to slip through the cracks. But some of these running backs who have broken out over the last, I say last, but over the entire season, really, Kyron Williams and Zach Moss are obviously the two that stand out the most. And I'm drafting pretty much as shortly after the Super Bowl ends. I think the FFPC contest open in March, if I'm not mistaken. I'm usually in the lobby starting to fill drafts out around that time. And that's really the time when, if you're drafting best ball teams, you've got to be considering any and all scenarios, especially for a game like the FFPC. I'm going to butcher the name, but it's the $125 best ball tournament. But
Yep.
before
literally, that
the
is
never
literally
too early.
the never too early tournament.
Yes.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, so like something like the never too early, there's a lot of things you can consider both from a incoming rookie draft perspective, but then also players on the roster who could take a leap forward. And those are some, I think, the optimal times to be buying in on players. First of all, rookies, if you have a strong rookie evaluation process, or if you're in on the rookies, a lot of people who weren't looking at rookie data, who aren't really putting in the work to see who's coming in, where they could be drafted, and kind of I use a lot of efficiency metrics and Pro Football Focus and weigh them against other historical incoming rookies to kind of see who I like based on things like yards after contact per attempt, breakaway rush rate, things like that. It's what ran me into Keaton Mitchell earlier this offseason is a guy who I really liked a lot. But I'm constantly trying to figure out holes in my game for players on current rosters who maybe I'm sleeping on. And guys like Kyron Williams and Zach Moss were far removed from my radar for much of that early process. And to some degree it kind of makes sense, because you can see where there's going to be situations where you have rookies who are going to come in and that could upset things. Evan Hall was a big guy who was getting so much buzz really before the draft took place, and then even after he got selected by the Colts, who created a lot of buzz. And Zach Moss was a guy who I faded as a result of Evan Hall. But Zach Moss had a pretty decent profile coming out of college at Utah a few years back when he joined the Bills, and he even had a few good weeks with the Colts last season when they traded for him. And I think it was that Nyheim Hines trade where they swapped running backs or something. So trying not to sleep on guys who are lower on depth charts, who are just, I mean, they're absolute massive values. We try to build teams around value all off season long, right? We're constantly looking for those late round sleepers, and they're a lot harder to hit on at wide receiver. But at running back, you can find them. And if all of a sudden they're getting that 80% snap share, the 60% opportunity share, which is what Kyron Williams has shockingly done. And then even Zach Moss, actually 80% opportunity share and 40% snap share weeks 1 through 5 this year before Jonathan Taylor came back. Those are guys who we want, and those are guys who I sleep on, and those are guys who I think also a lot of drafters at large tend to sleep on, because it's just so easy to, one, forget guys we haven't heard much about or haven't done much recently, but then two, it's very easy to get enamored with the guys running ahead of them who are taking in early rounds: Christian McCaffrey, Austin Eckler, Jonathan Taylor, in this case with the Zach Moss example. So I kind of pick through things like that in my game and ask myself, why didn't I like this player? Why wasn't I drafting this guy? Why didn't I see the value there? And I'm telling myself now, making mental notes, don't get Zach Moss or Kyron Williams again in 2024. Like, let's be a little bit better at this thing and fill up those holes and see what we can do.
Yeah, I want to talk about Kyron Williams here to lead things off. The thing is, and actually before we get to Kyron Williams, I should mention this too. If you're looking for weekly action, we've been talking about the best ball tournament, the never too early best ball tournament. We still have action going on at the FFPC right now. Just go to myffpc.com. You can play in the FFPC weekly challenge. There's no draft, no salary cap. You can choose 10 or 12 players, depending upon if you want to play with kicker and defense or not. By 1 p.m. on Sunday, watch them ride through the weekend's games. No stacking, one player per team. Enter for as little as $35, win up to $2,500. Shout out to our producer tonight, Tyler Soto, the man behind the glass. Coming up, we will have help on the way to help you set your Week 13 lineups. We'll also get into the BetterCast, all those over-unders that you are probably already seeing on the BetterCast app. Zach's going to help me set mine for those tonight. And then we'll find out where he stands on certain players, including one that I'm gonna talk about in a second here. And then we'll give you some start-sit lineup advice while we ease in to the Seahawks and the Cowboys here on Sunday Night Football. Kyron Williams, Zach, is a player that I never really was in on as far as like my dynasty drafts. I was kind of like, whatever. Not great metrics, not a great speed score, doesn't do anything special as far as the athletic measurables go. I was listening to Mike Shope talk about this. Mike Shope from WGR 550, the Deep End Fantasy Football Podcast.
Yes.
And he plays in the FFPC a lot. And I was surprised to hear him say this. Like, he co-hosts that show with Adam Krautwurst, and Krautwurst was a guy that stole Kyron Williams for me in a lot of Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship drafts where I play in a lot of leagues. Krautwurst stole Kyron Williams for me in a lot of those drafts. And Mike said, Adam, why were you in on Kyron Williams? I didn't like the underlying metrics like this. He didn't look like a special player to me. But I think the important thing to understand, whether you're playing best ball or whether you're playing redraft, the thing that stuck out in my mind, I'm with Mike. I was never wowed with this guy. But when you consider the depth chart, and we're always looking for these injury away type guys, the guys that just need a shred of opportunity, yeah, they might not turn into anything. But when they do turn into something, like Kyron Williams, as you pointed out, inexplicably did this year. I don't know how he's doing it, but I do know there's a possibility of doing it. And I think that's what you have to look at in best ball drafts, and even in drafts right now, or even in leagues right now where you're having waivers go off, every Wednesday night, Sunday, whatever. You have to get these guys on your team because they probably won't hit, but if they do, they hit hard.
They do hit hard, and sometimes they even hit in ways that we just can't fully explain. The Kyron Williams being a player who is capable of producing in fantasy, I think, was always kind of on our radar, even with the underwhelming combine. You mentioned that he's not particularly athletic. He doesn't blow you away. His combine, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I remember it being wildly disappointing. Like, we were like, it's over for Kyron Williams. We thought he was fun. He was a mass producer, for more or less at Notre Dame, but 5'9", 194 pounds, and then didn't show much at the combine, and that was kind of going to be like his one saving grace. Like, okay, he's small, under 200 pounds, but he's going to hopefully show enough athleticism where we're going to be able to say there's a path for him to give us fantasy relevance. And there wasn't, and we wrote him off. But then the one thing I do remember from last year, and it's kind of hard to think back even to as early as like something like training camp 2022, but there were actually reports that the Rams liked him a lot more than I think we kind of expected early on for a 5th round draft pick. And with Cam Akers, trying to come back off of what was, now a full year removed from the torn Achilles that he suffered in training camp of 2021. So it was kind of supposed to be Cam Akers there. And then Kyron Williams was maybe one day going to do something as a 5th round pick. But there were even rumors back to his rookie year that he was a guy who Sean McVay and the staff were really kind of getting partial to, and injuries kind of derailed a bit of his rookie season. Didn't help him out a lot there. And then I think as a result, we slept on him throughout much of the 2023 offseason. We slept on him through, really leading right up to week 1. None of us really foresaw what was going to essentially be a bell cow role for Kyron Williams. And it was like right out of the gate. Like, it wasn't even like Cam Akers sucked and Kyron Williams, they tried him out. If I remember correctly, the narrative on that game was, it's amazing to see what Kyron Williams did in week 1. And then Cam Akers was kind of like, just laughed out of the building. I think he had like 20 carries for 22 yards or something. Yeah. Absolutely. And it was just terrible. And lo and behold, Cam Akers a healthy scratch, a couple of weeks, and off to Minnesota he goes. But Kyron Williams did have a lot of things that I think we look for in a zero RB profile. He was a great receiver out of the backfield during his days at Notre Dame, 35 receptions in 2020, 42 in 2021. You don't see a lot of college receivers that have 42 receptions running backs who have 42 receptions in a career, much less in a single season. And Kyron Williams topped 35 and 42 in his final 2 years at Notre Dame. So that's a very encouraging sign as far as in these PPR leagues like we're playing in over at the FFPC. You love seeing guys catch passes there. And then I think, again, the unprecedented thing has just been the bell cow role and then his overall efficiency on the ground. I wrote in my snap report over on Roto World just the other day that Kyron Williams has been shockingly efficient on the ground. Of running backs with at least 100 rush attempts, he currently ranks 2nd in yards after contact per attempt at 3.61. He's 20th in missed tackles forced at 23, and that's with missing 4 games. So he's stacked against the field as far as games go, and he's still roughly middle of the road in terms of missed tackles forced. And then his 20.4% missed tackle force rate ranks 12th amongst 35 running backs with 100 plus rush attempts. He's also destroying the game in PPR per touch. He's 3rd behind Raheem Mostert and Christian McCaffrey. The efficiency that he's displayed on the ground, I think, has really been just an unexpected part of his game. He never looked even this efficient in college on the ground. And we'll see if that's sustainable. Logic would probably tell us it's not, because we've got a large enough sample in college to see what he's done and what he's capable of. But even if the efficiency on the ground fades, he's getting such a high opportunity share. He's getting enough work in the receiving game and the running game that he's going to be able to probably be fantasy successful through the remainder of this season, no doubt. And then hopefully the Rams realize what they have in him and they don't decide to do something crazy like go out and draft a running back in the second round or something, or the first round because they really like someone or whatever. Williams has been good and a very pleasant surprise. I don't think anyone really saw coming in this capacity. Not even Adam Kraftwerk, with respect to Adam Kraftwerk. I mean, I'll give him credit for being all over him. That's awesome. But I think,
and it's not like he was drafting him in like the 7th or 8th round. I mean, he's taking him, when everybody else is gone at that point. And it just happened. Like I was getting him, Zach, in so many drafts, and then all of a sudden I have a draft with Krautwurst, and I was never getting him because he was always taking him around her. But what the Rams have going on there, I think is interesting. As long as Stafford can stay healthy, look at the next couple of seasons. Kupp, this Nakua that they found, obviously Puka Nakua has been unbelievable. Kyron Williams, Tyler Higbee's locked up there too. You improve that offensive line a little bit more, there could be something there. Let's go to JPJ, our man Jim Parsons Jr. watching us on Facebook tonight. He has a start-sit decision. We're about an hour or so from kickoff, and it involves one of these players tonight. He is sitting DK Metcalf tonight in favor of Christian Kirk. Christian Kirk is at home, beg your pardon, not in Cincinnati. He is at home against the Bengals this week. DK Metcalf obviously kicking off tonight at the Dallas Cowboys. I have no problem with this. In fact, Zach, if I was facing this decision myself, I would be playing Christian Kirk over DK Metcalf, and I really wouldn't lose much sleep over it. I think that's the right call.
Yeah, I think it's the right call as well. Metcalf has, I think, probably been slowed a little bit by some hip injury. I think it was like a hip and was it elbow? I know it was definitely a hip injury with Metcalf, which I think has slowed him a couple weeks of the season. Certainly, Geno Smith has regressed tremendously, probably back to what we expected Geno Smith to be at the start of last year when we were laughing that Pete Carroll was actually going to try this thing. And he surprised us in 2022. He's not really surprising us this year. This is kind of like what we expected. And and as a result, receivers for the Seattle Seahawks suffer as a whole. Christian Kirk, the last 3 weeks, 7 targets, 6 targets, a whopping 11 targets against the 49ers. Or am I going backwards? No, I'm going the right way. I'm making sure I got the timeline correct. I'm like, am I reading this correctly? Yeah, 7, 6, and 11 targets for Christian Kirk over the last few weeks. 89 yards against the Jaguars, 104 yards against the 49ers. And I like that matchup. Certainly, you said they were playing the Bengals. I do get concerned about game script in games like that, where I'm not expecting the Bengals to offer much in the way of offensive output. Are the Jaguars going to pass as much as maybe we would like to see in a game script that was maybe a little bit more balanced? That always kind of I factor in. But overall, I think Kirk has established himself as Trevor Lawrence's preferred option. I think he's still going to get his, even if it's maybe not a 10 target day or something like that.
Well, we'll keep it on the in the YouTube chat right now. John Terry, very accomplished FFPC player. He has an FFPC flex question tonight. Obviously, tight end premium scoring. He can only pick one of these guys. Is it Jake Ferguson tonight against those Seattle Seahawks, as Ferguson is going to be taking on those guys, catching passes from Dak Prescott? Or is it Devin Singletary, who is going to be going up against the Denver Broncos this week? I don't have a good feel on this. My initial lean is to Ferguson, but it's not like he's been lighting it up the last few weeks in Dallas. And obviously, Brandon Cooks has really been coming on, Zach. The CeeDee Lamb is an absolute monster. Don't forget about Michael Gallup kind of hanging out there as well. I would lean towards Ferguson, but is there something to Devin Singletary this week against the Broncos?
There certainly could be. Last week we did see Dameon Pierce return to the Texans backfield, but Pierce was not the featured back as far as things are concerned with the Texans backfield. I believe it was Singletary dominating both snaps and led the way in touches for the Texans backfield. It wasn't a lot, 12 touches, 72 yards of scrimmage, certainly a step down from the previous 100 plus yards from scrimmage that we saw from each of the previous 2 weeks. But Singletary, I think, has kind of done the whole, hot hand thing pretty well, which earned him the opportunity to continue playing in that lead role for the Texans this past week against the Jaguars. So I don't mind it. I am curious to see. I'm just looking up real quick. Jake Ferguson. I'd be curious to know just how the Seahawks have performed as of late against against tight ends, because sometimes we can find those recently exploitable matchups. One of my favorite tools on RotoViz is the matchup analysis tool that they have over there. And RotoViz all the time. Over the last 5 weeks, the Seahawks have allowed the 15th most points to fantasy tight ends. Now, this is PPR, not tight end premium, like in the FFPC, but 15th middle of the pack there. 8 targets, 14, 8, 3, and 6 over that 5-week span as well. So Seattle looks like they're a little bit vulnerable to the tight end, but I think I would probably maybe lean Higbee in this one, or I'm sorry, Singletary in this one. But what do you think? Now that we have this information.
Well, and the thing is, Zach, like I'm normally biased, with the tight end premium stuff. Normally, when it's this close, I just say let's go with the pass catcher here. I look at Devin Singletary and as you said, this past week, Dameon Pierce returns. All of a sudden, Singletary went from 30 carries to 22 carries to 6 carries this past week. I will say this, and this is important. Singletary saw 7 targets, caught 6 of them for 54 yards, and that can't go unnoticed. Like we can't just not talk about that. That's significant. So against Denver this week, it's close. I think I'd go Ferguson here, but this is one of those things. You ask me today, it's Ferguson. Tomorrow I might say, no, I changed my mind. It's Singletary,
Yeah, no, it's a fine needle to thread. I will say this, just looking at it also, 7 targets for Singletary in that Week 12 contest against the Jaguars. Playing from behind, they lost 24-21. Also, 2 targets or less in every single other game for Singletary, even when he was getting that bell cow roll with Pierce out. So from the tight end premium scoring perspective, I would probably not bet on 7 targets happening again for Singletary this week, and maybe write it off as a one-off. And I think that in that case, knowing that carried the majority of his production, I would probably tilt more towards Ferguson in those regards.
So we are leaning towards Ferguson, John, but we definitely could be sold the other way if we get the right salesman talking to us, for sure. Let's talk about. I want to skip over. So just real briefly, let's touch on this. Aaron Rodgers, is there any reason to pick him up? I mean, if he is coming back, it could be in time for Week 16. You could get him for your Week 16 and Week 17 this year in the FFPC. I would never use the term league winner for him. But I think we have to evaluate the likelihood of him actually playing this year. Fun to talk about that he's coming back right now from the Achilles injury. I lean towards find a better way to spend this roster spot. Don't get Aaron Rodgers on your team here, Zach.
Yeah, I would too. If you kind of walk through the logic of what would lead you to pick up Aaron Rodgers, so you're talking about picking up for a playoff run. Chances are, if you're in a playoff run, you probably have a half decent quarterback as is. You're not rolling out Jake Browning or Tim Boyle or Zach Wilson or one of the other mini backups, Josh Dobbs. You're probably not rolling out any of those guys. So my assumption would be you're probably pretty good at the quarterback position. If you're talking about trying to add Aaron Rodgers for a playoff run, I would ask real quick, who do they play those final 2 weeks with that stretch? Week 16, I think it's the Commanders, and
you're looking at Commanders, like you said, Week 16, and then Week 17 they go to Cleveland.
Yeah, so if you're adding him, even like you're adding him probably to stream against the Commanders and their horrible pass defense, you can maybe have a little bit of an argument there. But I'm skeptical that he's even going to come back. In the event that he does, I don't think, like you said, I'm not putting league winner on his name. He's not someone who, if I missed out on even against the Commanders, I'm going to be like bummed out about it. You're probably already set enough at quarterback that you shouldn't be wasting that spot. There's going to be so many players in the next couple of weeks who we're going to really want to be considering adding, who are maybe hanging out on the waiver wire for the last several weeks, that now we're scooping up because we realize that a single injury could completely shift our playoff outlook if we're to advance, another week through the fantasy playoffs. So burning that spot on Aaron Rodgers, I don't think it's worth it. And you're definitely not going to play him in the championship game against the Browns, even if you get there. So you're basically adding him for possibly 1 week against the Commanders.
And like, I'd much rather have a running back there. Like we just talked about, an injury away type running back. I think that you are ultimately setting yourself up for success with that boom potential with a running back. I don't see how much boom potential there is for Aaron Rodgers. Let's go to the chat right now. Derek Brown from Fantasy Pros. What's up, dude? The beard is furious, looking like Santa for holiday season. Yeah, I might have to dye it white, and we'll see what happens there if I don't shave it prior to Christmas. But Chris Lude has a real fantasy football question. Hello, guys. What do you think about Tyler Lockett tonight? I have to decide either him or George Pickens, PPR flex. So George Pickens, and we can get into a larger conversation about the new OC in Pittsburgh and his effect on the Pittsburgh offense. But Pickens is at home against the Cardinals this week. Obviously, Lockett on the road at Dallas. I lean towards Lockett in this scenario, but both of these guys, and what's frustrating about both these guys, and you would know this, Zach, is a best ball guy. I love these guys for best ball, but from like trying to figure out what weeks are going to be the weeks that they're going to succeed in, it's been really, really tough to tell, especially Lockett over the last several seasons too. And obviously DK Metcalf has something to do with that. So it's frustrating to try to pick one of these guys. I lean towards Lockett here. What say you?
I lean towards Lockett. Certainly, I still like the overall quarterback matchup, just Geno versus Kenny Pickett's not really doing a whole lot for me there. There could also definitely be a situation where the Seahawks are going to be playing from behind in this game. I'd certainly expect that. I don't know what the spread is. I have no doubt that the Cowboys are certainly favored in this game. So it's probably going to set up a game where it's going to be negative game script for the Seahawks. Are going to be playing from behind. Just kind of as we saw last week against the 49ers, that game got wildly off the rails. I remember checking in at halftime on my way home from my parents over Thanksgiving, and I wasn't sure if the Seahawks had touched the ball through the first half, but hopefully that doesn't happen quite this way for the Seahawks tonight. If it is a negative game script, hopefully they can actually extend possessions long enough to make Lockett a little bit more fantasy viable. Before that dud and against the 49ers, 5 catches for 51 yards against the Rams, and the week before that, unsurprisingly, against the Commanders, 8 catches, 92 yards, and a touchdown. Lockett has had a few weeks of 90-plus yards, 80-plus yards, and then he's got 4 touchdowns on the season. So I would ride with Lockett here. The other interesting thing, too, with George Pickens is in last week's game, I should know the numbers off the top of my head, but I don't. But I had to watch it for work the other day, so I know that it wasn't great. Pickens, 3 catches for 58 yards. He had a long of 43. So if you're chasing any of like that, he got me 8.8 fantasy points. He's big play capable. Yes, he is, but 45 yards against the Packers, 38 against the Browns, 58 against the Bengals, saving his bacon with the 43-yard catch last week. I don't think it's really going to be there for him, so I would tend to be off of Pickens and more on Lockett here as well.
Yeah, and just looking at the volume for Lockett, too. I mean, you're talking about a guy who, granted, he only saw 5 targets last week. 3 for 30 was not great against San Francisco, but there's a lot of people who aren't great against San Francisco. But before that, 7 targets, 10 targets, 8 targets, 9 targets. I mean, the volume is there, and he's transformed. I mean, he's had a couple of 8-catch games in 2 out of his last 5 games. So, I mean, there is something there, certainly much more than George Pickens. So I'm with you on this. I think you got to go with Lockett, Chris, and thank you for chiming in tonight. We appreciate it.
Yeah,
Jonathan,
Steelers also.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Steelers also get the Cardinals. I mean, you want to talk about a game that's probably a positive game script for the Steelers. That could really be for a team that likes to run the ball. This could be a game where Jalen Warren and Najee Harris both see anywhere from 12 to 15 carries with how much they use their running back. So that would also, I'd say, be another ding against Pickens for this week.
By the way, the latest spread, Zach, I'm seeing on the Seahawks-Cowboys game, I got the Cowboys by 9.5 right now, a total of 47.5. So certainly,
I mean that's shootout territory, or passing territory at least for the Seahawks. Get that game going.
Ian Rappaport reported that Jonathan Taylor suffered a thumb injury this past week, requiring further evaluation. Puts his status in doubt going forward. I know the Colts are being positive about this. They're hoping to have him back in 2 or 3 games, and not to keep bringing up Adam Krautwurst, but this is the guy that always says never drop a running back, and hopefully you didn't drop Zach Moss, because you kind of touched on this earlier in the program. This is a guy that was crushing it, absolutely crushing it with Jonathan Taylor out, and now all of a sudden we should be back to this, right? There's no reason that Zach Moss should be on fantasy benches going forward, right, Zach?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't put him on fantasy benches. He was an absolute smash when he had that 5-week stretch. What's crazy is he had that 5-week stretch, but he was actually inactive for week 1. So I think he was dealing with like an arm or a wrist injury that he suffered in training camp. So he really only got 4 weeks. And over those 4 weeks, He still finishes the running back 15 in expected fantasy points. He was the running back 5 in fantasy points over expected. Super efficient on the ground. I posted this earlier to Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it. During his 5-week stretch as a Colts running back 1, Zach Moss is the only running back in the entire league to have an 80% snap share and a 40% opportunity share. So that means he had a higher snap share than guys like Christian McCaffrey, Kyron Williams, Saquon Barkley, all these guys who we would absolutely throw into our lineup every week. To be completely honest, I'd give you money if you could even tell me who the Colts running back 2 is now that Taylor's sidelined. I think I know it. I believe it's Trey Sermon.
Yes, it is.
We also know that because it's him, he's not playing. So Zach Moss should continue to run ragged over the defenses for these next few weeks. Even if the efficiency and the production is not completely there, the volume alone should make him probably close to a top 15 play even on his worst weeks, I would say.
Yeah, and the only reason I know Sermon is because immediately when a running back goes down, I'm like, okay, who's the next guy, right? And then I was putting in these little dinky bids in my waivers last night. See, and I got Trey Sermon in a few spots. We'll see if it pays off. But believe me, I am hoping Zach Moss stays healthy for the remainder of the season because this could be big.
You just described how all of us ended up with like Emery DeMarcado and Zach Evans on our roster a few weeks ago because we're just constantly looking for the worst possible guys to add when anyone worth a damn goes down. So yes, that's what we do. We see a good player go down. We look for the next worst person behind him, and then we add him like animals in hopes that maybe he gives us a somewhat usable fantasy week. It kind of reminds me of Moneyball when Brad Pitt says, the problem is there's all the elite teams, there's 50 feet of crap, and then there's us. I'm scooping up the this is us of running backs whenever a good guy goes down.
By the way, nice trip down memory lane for Zach Evans. That almost seemed like last year for me. It has been such a war. Because like Zach Evans, like for Dynasty, like was a guy that a lot of people were excited about drafting in the early second round, mid-second round or whatever. And then, when things were happening with the Rams, they're kind of like, oh, Zach Evans. And then he wasn't getting any play whatsoever. And then we were still like out of desperation again a few weeks back. Oh, Zach Evans, maybe this is didn't work out. We have so much to get to tonight. When we come back, let's do the better cast. You're going to help me with my player props tonight involving CeeDee Lamb, Pollard, Prescott, Lockett. We'll get into again. Metcalf, Charbonnet, Geno Smith. I know you have a few more things to say about him, and I do too as well. So we'll get into the better cast, and then we'll actually get back to some of the other topics around fantasy football. The Bears backfield, I think, is interesting to talk about. We'll talk about the potential return of Treylon Burks as well, and what that means, if anything, for the remainder of the season. He is Zach Kruger from Roto World. I am Eric Balkman from the FFPC. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show right here on the Better Sports Network. We'll be back right after this.
The Bears have to be one of the most inept franchises of any sport I've ever seen in my entire life. And they share the city with the White Sox, who are also inept. Like, that is how bad the Bears are. I just don't understand how you can go your entire existence and the quarterback that wins you a Super Bowl is Jim McMahon. You couldn't find anybody else.
They don't have a good history with quarterbacks, but they let him be the quarterback for a long time, too.
Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes right there. Mm-hmm. And you drafted Mitch Trubisky. They were right there. There's a lot of pain in being a Falcons fan. The Bears are one of the teams I could argue they might have it worse, and they have a Super Bowl. And when the best quarterback in the past 50 years is Jay Cutler, you have a problem.
That's so funny that you just said that. We were talking about Jay Cutler the other day, me and my friend, and I was like, yeah, he was on, because we were watching the Colorado Rockies game against the Giants, and it looked like he was behind the thing. I was, he played for Denver most of his career. We looked it up. Chicago let him be their starting quarterback way too long.
Here's the thing, too, is that Jay Cutler wasn't bad. Like, he was erratic. He wasn't terrible, though.
The poor man's Brett Favre.
I'm taking him over Justin Fields. I'm sorry.
I would.
But Jay Cutler led that team to an NFC title game that they lost to Green Bay. But he's gotten farther than anybody else. You want to know who the other starting quarterback was for the Bears in the other Super Bowl appearance they made? It was Rex Grossman. What are we doing out here? It was Rex Grossman and Kyle Orton was the backup. How are you that bad? Bro, like, oh my God. Listen to the top 5. According to Football Reference, the top 5 greatest Bears quarterbacks of all time. Jay Cutler, number 1.
I can't believe it.
Sid Luckman, who last played in 1950, is number 2. Jim Harbaugh is number 3. Jim McMahon, the Super Bowl winner, is number 4, and he played there for 6 years. And Mitch Trubisky,
No way!
is number 5 on the list as terms of passing yards go.
The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show rolls on here on the Better Sports Network. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. The HSFF Hour, the Road of His High Stakes Lowdown. He is Zach Kruger at ZK_FFB from at RotoWorld_FB on the X machine. We're gamifying Thursday Night Football tonight on the BetterCast app. Check out Moose and Keith's game preview of the Seattle Seahawks at the Dallas Cowboys, including some of their top picks and plays. Then you can compete in our free contest by answering pregame questions, which Zach is about to help me do right now. It's going to be live in the BetterCast app. It's not going to be live. It is live right now in the BetterCast app. Then during the game tonight, you could predict what's going to happen, test your NFL knowledge as well with some trivia going on there. Chat with everybody in there about the big plays, the top performers, and the fantasy bus in real time. You don't have to buy anything. You don't have to subscribe to anything. It's always free to play. Watch Thursday Night Football this evening with us. Play our free contest, win tickets. Remember, the more questions you answer, the more tickets you win, and then the more things you can redeem those tickets for, such as NFL sign gear, authentic NFL sign gear, and more collectibles. Download the free BetterCast app in the App Store and Google Play right now. You just have to be 18 years or older. Before you get into the BetterCast, my buddy Barney Newkirk, longtime FFPC player, has a couple of teams. If I remember, and Barney, you can correct me on this. I think he has like 2 teams in the top 30 of the FFPC main event right now, as he's trying to win $1 million with his co-owner John Laskowski. But he wants to know, what about Michael King Kong Carter? Now that the Cards got rid of Ingram, and Keontae Ingram is now on the Chiefs practice squad. So now you look at the Cardinals with Michael Carter, who actually, Zach, got some pretty decent usage this past week. To me, Michael Carter is a guy that you probably want to add on your team just to see what happens with James Conner. If anything does, I don't know if Michael Carter is going to be the bell cow there, but he's certainly going to be a guy that you would look at potentially being flex worthy because of his pass catching prowess. Okay, I think we have Zach on mute right now. Let's see if he gets it. I apologize. the joys of live streaming here. Hold on, let's see if he gets it.
Can we hear me now?
Yeah, you're good. You're good. Go ahead, Michael Carter, go.
I didn't mute myself, so I didn't know that. Okay, so I first made a bad joke that Barney was in our show notes, clearly, because I already had this one queued up. So I need you guys to laugh at my joke. We already had this one ready to go. And then I wrote how my snap report over at Roto World, I touched on Michael Carter as an interesting player for kind of this back of the season run for the fantasy playoffs. You touched on the high snap share that he had this past week against the Rams. I wrote on it in my snap report article. I did say that we need to apply a little bit of context though to understand what we saw. So he had a 37.5% snap share in that win or in that loss to the Rams. But of those snaps, 24 of what he had or the majority of them, 21 of his 24 snaps in that game came in the fourth quarter of what was a blowout game. So the raw snap totals look really great for Carter if you don't realize, when he mostly came on the field. But 21 of 24 snaps came in a blowout loss to the Rams. He was decent in that game, 8 touches for 34 yards, not going to blow anyone away. He caught all 4 of his targets. But I'm personally of the opinion that I'm not a big believer in Emery DeMarcado. Yes, he's there. Yes, he was an adequate backup. Stepped in for while James Conner was out. But the I don't think that the Cardinals went out and added Michael Carter off of waivers because they were loving what Emery Demercado was doing. They certainly weren't loving what Keontae Ingram was doing because he's not on the team anymore, as you mentioned. Chiefs practice squad. Michael Carter was an interesting prospect during his days at North Carolina. He shared a backfield with Javonte Williams, which by all accounts would have, limited his overall production, but some of his efficiency metrics very good during his days in North Carolina. 6.6 yards per carry, 3.85 yards after contact per attempt. Of the running backs taken in his draft class, his yards after contact per attempt trailed only Jonathan Taylor, his teammate again, Javonte Williams, DJ Dallas, and then a deep cut, Raymond Calais. So a pretty good yards after contact per attempt total for his college numbers. And then he had, I believe it was 20 plus receptions in 3 of his 4 seasons at North Carolina, showing off the pass catching ability, which is really why the fantasy community kind of loved him heading into his rookie season with Carter. I think it's so easy to forget how high we were on guys like him because Breece Hall gets drafted the following year, and we kind of just, forget about what Michael Carter has done. But as a rookie, 964 yards from scrimmage, 4 touchdowns, and 5.4 yards per touch. 5.4 yards per touch is very good, highly efficient work, regardless of how you're getting those yards. All we care about is the fact that you're getting them. But he also had 36 receptions as a rookie on 55 targets. So we know that the Cardinals are going to probably run Connor into the ground. I think they're committed to doing that. But in the event that he goes down, he has an extensive injury history. Michael Carter is a guy where if you can afford to stash him in a deep league, especially like these tournaments like we're talking about here, that's a guy who I think, could possibly be that league winner caliber, especially with the pass catching upside that he provides. We know that, it only takes 1 week of 7 targets like we saw from Devin Singletary last week. And now we're talking about, starting you the following week. So Michael Carter I like, but just understand that the snaps, most of them came in a blowout loss to the Rams, and it's probably not the clearest of indicators that they want to use him, but my bet would be he will kind of start to run more as the RB2 going forward.
Yeah, and I would think too, he just got there as well. So they're probably going to bring him on slowly. They probably didn't think they'd be bringing him on this fast because of that blowout that they had. So I think there's something to be said for that as well. To your point, Zach, if you got the spot, take him. I highly recommend it, but you have to be prepared that he just may not hit the remainder of the season. But we want to take chances here. Let's take some chances tonight in the better cast. Okay, so the better cast tonight, we are going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 pregame questions tonight. As a reminder, all the viewers, even though Zach and I are going to answer these questions in my better cast app right now, doesn't mean that that's going to be it. There's going to be plenty of in-game stuff tonight, including what's going to happen next. How many yards and points is going to be, accrued going forward. Some NFL trivia in there as well, but we will answer the pregame questions right now. Now, we'll kick things off with Dak Prescott here, Zach. Over or under 274.5 passing yards. 274.5 is an interesting number because prior to the Cowboys bye this week, he never hit that number once. However, in the 5 games since that bye, he has hit that total 4 out of 5 games, and it has not been close. 304, 374, 404, 331. The one time he didn't hit it was when the Cowboys were in Carolina and they won by 23. He didn't have to throw it a whole lot that game, and he still came within 100 yards of it. Your thoughts on 274.5 against the Seattle Seahawks tonight?
I like that number for the points that you pointed out. He's gone over there 4 of the last 5 games. Also, another interesting thing, some of these numbers where he's posting these absurd passing numbers, they are coming in games where it's not even close, and the Cowboys are just not letting off. Last week's win over the Commanders, 45-10. 32 pass attempts, 331 yards. You mentioned the Carolina game blowout. If I remember correctly, he still threw it 38 times. I'm shocked that number didn't even hit 200 for a guy who aired it out 38 times in that game. We'll scratch that as a one-off. He should have had 600 passing yards that game. Against the Giants, 49-17, 335 pass attempts, 404 yards. Insane. Against the Eagles, 374, 44 pass attempts. That was actually a loss. We can probably figure out why he threw 44 times that game. They were trailing. And then against the Rams, a 23-point blowout, 304 yards, 31 pass attempts. Another theory that I have in regards to this play is there's been a lot of whispers as of late of maybe MVP Dak Prescott. Certainly the Cowboys are playing well. He's had these gaudy pass numbers of late, not just the yards, but also the touchdown totals, 4, 3, 4, 2, and 4. 5 straight games with 2 more touchdown passes. I could see a situation where the Cardinals or the Cowboys aren't just playing into the whole, this is our offense, this is what we run, but even in a game where they're winning, if they're beating the Seahawks tonight, if they're smashing them, I could just kind of see the Cowboys playing into we have a hot quarterback and we're going to let him sling it around a little bit. So I think that he could definitely get over this number, and certainly recent trends have suggested that he's more than capable of it as well.
We're going to take the over on Prescott, but will we take the over on Pollard? And I think this is a tougher sell. So the Bettercast has him at 67.5 rushing yards this evening. Now, Pollard hit that number easily the first 3 weeks of the season. He has only hit that number once since week 3. And that was last week, 13 carries, 79 yards in a 45-10 win over the Commanders. Seahawks tonight, 67.5 to me, Zach. It seems a little aggressive. I know with the Cowboys being 9.5-point favorites, you like to think the game's going to set up for Pollard to be, running the ball quite a bit tonight. I don't know if 67.5 to me sounds like an over. What about you?
Well, I think first of all, if I'm going to bet the Prescott over, I think logically we would have to fade another pick somewhere else, and so the rushing yards would probably be where I would tend to back off a little bit. You said that number 67.5. You pointed out he's only cleared that once since week 3. That to me is reason enough to fade it. A guy like Tony Pollard, I would probably be looking more for like a total yards from scrimmage prop, where then I can also factor in if Dak's going to hit his over, how's that going to happen? It's probably going to involve Pollard. He even had 6 receptions last week against the Commanders. I would probably be looking more of if I'm going to do an over on a Pollard prop, I think I would try to do an over on yards from scrimmage and fade the and fade the over and rushing yards and take the under on that one.
We are going to take the under on the rushing yards at 67.5. We'll go back to CeeDee Lamb here. Bettercast has his total for receiving yardage at 86.5. Now, you look at what A.J. Brown and CeeDee Lamb were doing this season as far as yardage goes, it's been insane. Lamb has games of 143, 117, and then 4 in a row, 117, 158, 191, 151. It's been crazy. Then Carolina, granted, we talked about this game already, only 38 receiving yards that game. Washington, only 53 receiving yards. Both of those games, Dallas won by 23 and then by 5 touchdowns, by 35 on Thanksgiving against the Commanders. Now they get Seattle tonight. And while this is shaping up to, this could be another game where the Cowboys do win by 17 or 24 and Lamb is held under that number. Does the fact play into it that we chose the over for 274.5 for Prescott lead us to believe, okay, we got to take over 86.5 for Lamb? Or is it just too high of a number for us to take the over?
Certainly if you're betting on the Prescott over, you're not going to feel like a complete fool for taking the over on Lamb. Even if it doesn't hit, you can kind of rationalize your process there. That by proxy of one, you're going to have the other. But I will point out here, I'm looking at top 5 wide receiver fantasy scores against the Seahawks secondary over the last 5 weeks. And we have receivers in those games going 89 yards, 56, 41, 70, and 79 for an average of 67 receiving yards per game. Now, one of those guys is Diami Brown, who inexplicably caught 2 passes for 41 yards. But there's been a couple receivers who have been held under that total the last few weeks, but those receivers are also not CeeDee Lamb, who just continues to see an absurd amount of work. And then, as you point out, also has produced at a high level. Lamb over the last few weeks, 9 targets, 9, 14, 16, 14. This is all these years we spent drafting CeeDee Lamb. We're finally getting the target share that we want. For the sake of maybe, playing into our over on Dak Prescott, I would kind of confidently bet on a little bit of a bounce back game for Lamb, just 91 total yards over his last 2 weeks. Maybe he's able to top it this week against the Seahawks, who, if I'm not mistaken, have bench starting cornerback Tariq Woolen. Is that correct? I heard that on the radio the other day. They're not playing him.
Yeah, so I know they did during the game. And then I thought Pete Carroll said afterwards Woolen was dealing with some sort of injury in the game where he could have played through it, but they didn't think he was effective enough, something like that. Now, Woolen, as far as the the injury aspect goes, he's got a chest, or no, I beg your pardon. Woolen does not have a chest injury. I'm trying to figure out what it was right now. Well, let me research this a little bit and try to figure out what the status is of Woolen. But it sounds like, regardless of Woolen's status, we're probably shifting to the over here for Lamb because of what we did with Prescott, and it could be a bounce back, like you said.
Yeah. I mean, 91 yards over the last 2 weeks. That's not exactly a Dak Prescott or a CeeDee Lamb game, and the targets have been there. He should be going well over that. The targets have really not been an issue for Lamb for really almost every game this season. You got a 4-target stinker in week 1, and then a 5 targets in week 5 against the 49ers. But I feel like, if for the sake of betting on the over with Dak, I think I would be tempted to go with the over here and just kind of to roll that in there and bet on the over hit here for Lamb as well. And after a slow 2 weeks,
47.5 is a total. Seahawks are 9.5-point dogs. What about Tyler Lockett? Zach Kruger, 48.5 is what we're looking at for receiving yards for him. He's been kind of like half and half on this season. He's played 11 games. He has missed 48.5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. And he's hit it, obviously, 6 times this year. So you look at, and I know every week's new and every matchup's different. And obviously, who they're going up against and what the Seahawks are doing week 1 is not what they're doing in week 13. Lockett at 48.5 receiving yards. This kind of depends upon what we think with Geno Smith here, and we'll get to him in a little bit. Where do you stand on Tyler Lockett, 48.5?
I think I'd be more partial to Lockett at 48.5 rather than Metcalf, which we're going to probably get to his in a second here. So I'm not going to fully reveal it here, but in a game where we know that there's a good chance that they're going to be throwing the ball a lot more, if indeed the spread hits here, if it starts getting to that territory where the Cowboys are covering at -9, and that means that the Seahawks are going to be playing catch up, I would envision one of these 2 wide receivers hitting. The Lockett targets have been there. They've been spotty from time to time. Last week, just 5, but before that, 7, 10, 8, 9. We've got enough of a consistent stretch of targets for Lockett, where I think that if this game's going to evolve into a game where the Seahawks are going to have to air it out just to keep pace with the Cowboys, then I think Lockett can get back to that 7 target range that we saw the last few weeks. At 48 yards or 49 yards, that's what he would need to hit the over here. That doesn't feel like an improbable number for him to clear. I think he still has looked pretty good overall as far as his efficiency goes. Even in his age, he's still able to get open, exploit mismatches, and find areas in the field where he can get it done. So I would tend to lean more of the Lockett over 48.5 here, as opposed to the Metcalf one, which I guess we're going to hit on here in a moment.
Let's do Metcalf now. And I know this is, I should have put Geno Smith on here earlier, but it is what it is. Geno Smith is dealing with an elbow injury, and I almost wonder that, Metcalf's part of what makes him great is his ability to separate, his ability to get downfield. And I know Lockett can do that too, but I almost wonder if, do you view the elbow situation with Geno Smith, where he's going to play, but he's clearly not 100%? Does that work in the favor of more targets for Lockett over Metcalf, or am I reading too much into it?
That was kind of how I was actually viewing this earlier on when I was looking at Jackson Smith and Jigba as well. We don't have his prop here. I'm not sure what it is, but in some of my deeper leagues where I'm starting multiple guys in the flex, I saw the Geno injury earlier this week, and it kind of made me lean a little bit more towards even playing JSN over some of the other options that I had in a few leagues. So we don't know how severe this elbow injury is. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was something that even carried into last week, and I think Pete Carroll kind of downplayed it. But
Pete Carroll downplays all injuries too.
Yeah, right, and that's part of the problem. Right. That's part of the problem. But I mean, I said before the break that the Seahawks had me questioning whether or not they had even gotten the ball in the first half of last week's loss to the 49ers, just because the offensive output was so abysmal in that first half. And I think that, you can probably at least fairly assume that Geno Smith's elbow had a little bit to do with that. We know that the deep game, as you mentioned, is part of kind of Metcalf's bread and butter, the big body receiver that he is, the explosive player that he is. He tends to be a guy who can exploit cornerbacks down the field and make those big plays. if I'm betting on the Geno Smith injury being a cause for concern, which I kind of am with where I'm playing JSN, then I would probably assume that it could certainly affect Metcalf in the deep part of the passing game, which is where he thrives. So I think the under for Metcalf is where I would lean for this one.
I think you're right, and I think that's the way I'm going to go on this as well. We could see a lot of underneath stuff tonight. I actually am forced to start in a league in one of my KFFSC champ. I think is it a championship game or is it might just be playoffs? I can't remember. But I had like Luke Musgrave and Pat Fryermuth, and I can't remember who my other tight end was, like Hawkinson or something. So I'm starting Noah Fant this week and tonight. Well,
yeah, so
we'll see how that goes.
We're playing all the hits.
Yeah, yes. More likely, I'm playing all the misses. Is what it's going to be tonight on Fant. But we'll see what happens with that. We're going under with DK Metcalf now. I don't want to say we reluctantly took the over on Lockett, but it wasn't like a massive ring, shouted from the hills endorsement. We're taking the under on Metcalf. Does this mean, as we look at Zach Charbonnet tonight, does this mean we should be taking the over on Charbonnet at just 33.5 receiving yards? I believe we already found out Kenneth Walker is inactive tonight, so it is going to be the Charbonnet show again. What are your feelings, Zach Kruger, on Zach Charbonnet at 33.5 rushing yards only?
I cannot believe that this number is as low as it is. I got to look it up real quick. I'm sitting here ready to throw Zach Charbonnet stats at you, and I'm lacking the one that matters from last week. Last week, 47 rush yards again, and then what I already have laid out here, horribly down game for all the Seahawks offensive players against 49ers. Week before that, 47 rushing yards. Week before that, 44 rushing yards on just 6 attempts against the Commanders. At least for the last 3 weeks, Charbonnet has gone over that total. I need to pull up his full game log to see the entire thing. But the other point that I was ready to make before I had to, earnestly search out rushing yards. Zach Charbonnet, for as disappointing as he was in last week in fantasy, and we can't overlook that it was a dud game for him. We can't deny that. But a lot of what we had hoped for when we started him was there. He had an 87% snap share, which is exactly what we wanted when we started him. He had a 38% opportunity share. That's a high-end number. He totaled 58 yards from scrimmage on 18 touches. If I'm not mistaken, I think he had like 23 or 24 of the Seahawks backfield touches. The volume was there for Zach Charbonnet. As far as fantasy goes, it literally just didn't hit. 9.8 PPR points to RB29 on the week. But he still went over the total that we're seeing here before us. What is it, 33.5 you said?
Yep.
I'd be shocked if it's still there, but I'm smashing if it is because he's hit that each of the last 3 weeks. 2 of those weeks, mind you, is also with Kenneth Walker still healthy and available. And now Walker's out. The Seahawks played him at the rate that we wanted to see. The play did not work. It was an overall disappointing performance, but the fact that the volume and the snaps are both there would lead me to believe that by some way or another, 10 carries for 34 yards feels very, very possible for Charbonnet. So I'd be smashing that over really without thinking about it.
Yeah, we did think about it. You made the good argument. I've already logged it in. We are over on Zach Charbonnet at 33.5 tonight. Okay, now here's the elephant in the room here. Geno Smith, over or under 222.5 yards. Now, normally I just bring up like, okay, this is what he's did throughout the season, but this elbow injury really has only affected him. You can make the case that it was the end of the Rams game, right? When he went out, when Drew Lock had to come in, and then he was dealing with this injury the entire Niners game. Well, in that Rams game, 233, so he just got over, but again, he didn't play that whole game. And then the Niners, 18-27 for just 180 yards. Kind of a clunker game for all the Seahawks that game. But Geno Smith tonight at Dallas, 222.5. We went over on Lockett. We went under on Metcalf. What are we doing with Geno Smith here at this number?
Here's the one problem I've got right now is the elbow injury I did not take into consideration when we took the over on Lockett. And now I think
we could still go under on Lockett if we want, Zach.
We could because now I'm thinking about it, and I'm just curious where you stand because I like the argument there. 180 passing yards against the 49ers. Now, we already mentioned, again, horrible first half. I don't even know what his passing yards were in that first half, but it literally looked like nobody had played a down of football for the Seahawks offense in that first half. So we can probably safely assume about 120 of those yards came in the second half. But if we're chasing a negative game script, you would certainly make the argument that he's going to be throwing enough to probably at least have a chance of getting there. The previous 2 weeks, 233, 369. But this isn't like a number that he's clearing on with any kind of consistent basis. You have 112 yards, 110, 219, 157 also baked in there. So even a healthy Geno Smith is split right down the middle. Kind of with it going over on this total. I think I'm going to take the under on Geno with that. And then do you think we should also pivot? Should we just go under all Seahawks?
The way that you're selling me on this, the only way I would say we take the over on Lockett is if we believe that, okay, the Seahawks have to move the ball somehow. And if it's not Metcalf downfield, then you would think that it's, well, I mean, the other thing is too, JSN, and you might have wrote about this. I can't remember if I read this from you or not. JSN's been doing, like, he's been living within, 5 to 10 yards past the line of scrimmage. So I almost wonder if that kind of takes away part of Lockett's game a little bit too. So maybe we could go under on Lockett there too.
Let's do it. Let's fade the Seahawks passing game and the overs there. Just see what happens. It's a hard one to play, in my opinion, when you're factoring in these injuries and guys playing on them. But 180 yards, I mean, he missed it by essentially 43 yards last week. That's not nothing.
Right.
The yards per attempt, not great. Adjusted yards per attempt, 5.0. That is looking like his second lowest total on the week. So let's do the full fade of the Seahawks passing attack and go unders on everyone. If you like it, let's do it.
I like it. We're doing it.
Right.
What about the game total on this? 47.5 is the total on this game. This is what a projected final score. I don't even know what this would be. Like, I hate doing math on the fly here. So you're looking at,
you're not talking to the right person either for this. You should have a smarter guest on.
This is probably like 29-19 roughly. What does that come up as? Yeah, I think 29-19. As far as a projected final score. How do we feel about that? To me, that seems aggressive for the Seahawks, and it seems low for the Cowboys. So maybe I just like the Cowboys to cover tonight. But 47.5 total points. Where do you stand on that, Zach?
I'm trying to look here real quick just at the Seahawks recent schedule and I'm trying to do mental math in my head, and I'm not doing great at it right now. But last week 31-13 against the 49ers, that would have gone under for that game. The previous week 17-16. I'm not so dumb that I don't know. That's not an under. Would have gone over in the previous week against the Commanders. Or over. I'm sorry, it's like 54.
Would have been under, or would have been over. You're right.
Yep. And then 40 against the Ravens. My thing is, and I'm not enough of a degenerate bettor to know this, but I feel like I have heard that one of the ways to go is unders on Thursday night games. Lethargic players.
Just unders in general this year have been hit. I mean, the scoring is significantly down this year. Unders have been hitting all over the place.
Yeah, well, half the league doesn't have a quarterback, so that would check out.
Maybe more than half.
yeah, we're still looking into it. I would take the under here just based on the Thursday night matchup, and then even recent weeks with the Seahawks, and we saw, if I'm not mistaken, in a blowout, the Cowboys did kind of call off the dogs a little bit, and that went over the Panthers. So if it were to hit that situation again, it wouldn't be improbable to think that maybe it turns into a backup game, early to midway through the fourth quarter. Hopefully it doesn't get to that point, because I'd like to actually see a good game on Thursday Night Football. They're tough to come by. We almost sucked into it with the Ravens-Bengals, and then Joe Burrow got injured.
So frustrating.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, if we don't see a good game and we see Cooper Rush tonight, might end up working out for our better cast picks. We'll see. The final one that we'll get to tonight here. Now, this is a point system, Zach. We're trying to accrue as many points as possible in this. Now, this is just a straight up pick. Who wins the game? Now, if we say the Cowboys and we're right and the Cowboys win, we get 10 points at it. But if we say the Seahawks and the Seahawks end up winning the game, we get 20 points. To me, twice as many points is not enough carrot to dangle in front of me where I'm going to snatch it. I still like the Cowboys, even though we're not getting paid out as much as we would if the Seahawks win. I think Dallas is the way to go tonight, right?
Yeah, well, all of our bets are basically setting up for a Dallas win. So if we're picking the Seahawks, we're pretty much just hedging. Like,
Right.
Picking the Seahawks would basically be hedging against our picks to try to walk away and say we were victorious one way or the other. But we're gonna stay confident with our Cowboys. We got a couple overs in here. We got the Cowboys ready to win. So let's set it up and say Cowboys outright winners in this one, 10 extra points, and then hopefully that they don't completely blow them out so our under hits as well.
And we don't want them to completely blow them out because the Better Cast will be so much more fun if we're watching a competitive NFL game tonight.
That's right.
That will complete the Better Cast portion of the program tonight. If any of you guys are already hanging out on the Better Cast, Howard Bender's in there right now leading the Better Cast coverage. You can download that in the App Store and Google Play. And that's for free. No subscription, no purchase required. Let's do this. Let's take another break. When we come back, we'll tell you a little bit more about the FFPC Weekly Challenge, and we're going to find out where Zach Kruger from Roto World stands on players like Dearness Johnson, Keaton Mitchell, Dalton Schultz, Sam Howell, and much more. It's all coming up in the second hour of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show here on Fantasy Football Night in America, exclusively on the Better Sports Network.
Speaking of the NHL games, I had a conversation with Coupe A Fiasco yesterday when we were producing High Stakes, and he was talking about playing video games. And since he covers fantasy football, I said, "Hey, are you going to be getting the new Madden this year?" And he goes, "Yeah, I don't really play Madden. I play NHL." And that tells you, and it really does, that I do feel that the NHL game is better than Madden. I feel like Madden is overrated. The NHL game is so realistic. I don't know if you guys saw the trailer and all the new additions that they added to this game, but it really looks good. I tried finding all the games that I had of NHL, and I thought I had a lot. I only have 4 of them. And that's because I used to live with my my roommate and good friend who got me into hockey, and we would play most of it in his house. So he has most of the games, but I do got 21.
There you go.
I got NHL 18. We got Connor McDavid up there. NHL 12, I think, was the start of the new consoles for me. But the big one, the holy grail of NHL games, NHL 94 for the Sega Genesis, right there. Look at that. Look at that beautiful cover. Look at it. Looks like a VHS tape. That's how good this game was.
No, let me stop you right there. So people, VHS tape, if you don't know, it's this like rectangular black plastic with the magnetic tape on the inside. Tape's this big. You put it in something called a VCR. For a little while, there was something called Beta that didn't last too long.
Look at this cartridge. I mean, they're not cartridges anymore. They're either discs or those little memory cards. But man, that thing is thick, right? And
you don't even need a cartridge or a disc anymore. You can buy the digital version.
And then you got Ron Barr on the book. I mean, he used to be always in the intro telling you about the team and what was going to be happening in the game. So NHL 94 is by far my favorite game, sports game. I love that game.
My apologies, ladies and gentlemen. That break was shorter than I actually thought it was. So I apologize. I was getting everything set up for Thursday Night Football here, Seahawks, Cowboys. We just did the Better Cast here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show right here on BSN, which you're watching. Zach Kruger from Roto World hanging out with me tonight. The FFPC Weekly Challenge, teased this a little bit earlier. It is here once again for Week 13 in the NFL. There is no draft. There is no salary cap in this. It is the same format as our FFPC Playoff Challenge, which we'll be launching here in the next couple of weeks. You can play against 9 other teams, 29 other teams, or 99 other teams. We have 10, 30, and 100-team contests. Pick your players. Watch the points pile up for the week. The results will be determined by the total points accumulated by each individual lineup entry. You can play with the classic, with the kickers and defenses, the slim without the kickers and defenses. Starts at $35 up to $200 as far as entry fees. New users will get $25 off their first FFPC entry of $35 or more. Just use the promo code ALARM at myffpc.com. ALARM, myffpc.com is where to use that. We kind of talked a little bit about Kyron Williams at the top of the show. I want to skip past that. Michael Carter, we touched on a little bit. Let me ask you this, Zach. I drafted Tank Bigsby in a ton of leagues this year as the injury away type guy, the backup to Travis Etienne. And everything he has shown me on the field makes me think that he is closer to being out of the league than a potential difference maker. I have been dropping Tank Bigsby in earnest to pick up D'Ernest Johnson as the guy that I would think would step into a pretty sizable role if Etienne were to go down. And quite frankly, I've seen a lot of D'Ernest Johnson that I really like this year, even with Etienne healthy. Where do you stand on D'Ernest Johnson?
So I wrote about D'Ernest Johnson in my Snap Report article for earlier this week, and I'm with you as far as Tank Bigsby goes. We are two losers who spent all offseason drafting him, and we bought into the hype. Doug Peterson was talking about how he can't wait for him to catch passes. Yada yada. Everything about Tank Bigsby in the offseason suggested that he was going to be a guy who was maybe going to have like a third down role at least as a pass catching back for the Jaguars, and that just simply has not, materialized in any capacity this season. Bigsby has 36 carries for 86 yards on the ground and a whopping 1 catch for 6 yards on 4 targets. I honestly can't believe that's even a real stat for a guy who we teased up the way that we did. But D'Ernest Johnson is a player who, again, if we're talking about end of the season runs, if we're talking about guys who we want to maybe try to prioritize a little bit to get us through the fantasy playoffs, if something were to unexpectedly break in our way and we're winning out these last couple of weeks, Johnson's a guy who the last several weeks has outright turned in increased opportunity shares, increased snap shares, and this is just relative to Tank Bigsby, but he was also the guy who came on the field when Etienne exited and then returned last week against the Texans. I believe it was a chest injury, and Etienne played out the game. And this is not a add and start D'Ernest Johnson tout this week in any capacity.
Right.
But Johnson over the last 2 weeks, 115 yards from scrimmage on 16 touches. That is buoyed a little bit by 2 receptions of 30 plus yards in each of the last 2 weeks, including a 42-yard reception against the Texans. But over the last 3 weeks, also, D'Ernest Johnson 29.8% snap share to Bigsby's 9.9%, and Johnson 22 touches to Bigsby's 14. Again, 16 of those coming in the last 2 weeks. And there was things that we liked about D'Ernest Johnson, if you remember, dating back to his days in Cleveland when he unexpectedly would rip off a couple of big games in replacement of Nick Chubb. He's a player who has looked more than capable of handling the workload when called upon. The rushing numbers, I think, overall have not been particularly efficient this year, but we had to just admit publicly that we were adding Emery DeMercado and Zach Evans a few weeks ago. So we know that we are adding players just based on their efficiency. Sometimes it's just a matter of, is the volume there and do we have a need? And if the answer to both of those questions could be yes, then you roster him, and if he pops up, then you make a decision at that point in time. But Johnson, in terms of emerging as the Jaguars RB2 over these last few weeks, I think is very much a thing. And again, if you're in a deep league and you're interested in stashing guys who could maybe fall into some volume down the stretch, he would be one of the guys on my radar. Very Michael Carter-esque, I would say, in terms of how I view him and the potential opportunity he could hit on.
I was just going to compare him to Michael Carter too, because I think there's a lot of similarities there. Now, Carter and Johnson are players you want to roster, not players you want to start this week. Let me throw Antonio Gibson out here at you, and I know you say, Balky, you're crazy. We're not playing Antonio Gibson this week. Well, let me throw this out. 6 carries for 21 yards against the Cowboys last week. Okay, we get it. 3 catches for 16 yards. And the Commanders are getting the Dolphins this week, a game that there could be a lot of pass catching ability for a pass throwing ability for Sam Howell, and Gibson might be getting some action there out of the backfield. And we have 6 teams on bye this week. I think there's something here for Gibson as a flex. Remember, in the FFPC, you can flex out 2 guys. Well, not can. You have to flex out 2 guys. What about Antonio Gibson? How sneaky of a second flex is he for the Commanders and FFPC players this week, Zach?
So I think there's certainly something to be had there. You mentioned the bye weeks. So let me just hit on those real quick. You have Baltimore's out. So Keaton Mitchell, Gus Edwards, you don't got them. You don't have James Cook because Buffalo is out. Chicago, whichever running back they decide to play with, you get none of them this week because they're on bye. You don't get Josh Jacobs. You're down Alexander Madison, and you're down Saquon Barkley. So you got a couple of like the top heavy guys, and a couple of the volume based leaders not there. So the fantasy field is already going to be stacked against it in terms of less high volume players to start this week, which means that I think PPR leagues are going to kind of get a little bit of advantage if there's a few of those pass catching backs out there who you can utilize. So one of the ones that I did point out again in my article this past week was Antonio Gibson. Week 12 for him. Didn't do a whole lot. The Commanders' offense as a whole didn't do a whole lot. But the previous 3 weeks before that, he was starting to kind of come into his own a little bit, I think, with Sam Howell and the passing game, with what I think has kind of been a shift in Washington's overall offensive philosophy. We know about the issues that Sam Howell had early on with taking just a ton of sacks. He was on pace at one point in time for like close to 100 sacks in a season. He's still not doing great. We can hit on that a little bit more here too. But the previous 3 weeks, 8, 9, and 10, because he was out week 11, Gibson had 5 targets, and 6 targets. Of those 16 total targets, he had 15 receptions for just over 100 yards and a touchdown total. Gibson's also one of the more efficient running backs in the league. It is among running backs with 50 plus opportunities, so he's not quite there from a volume standpoint, but averaging 6.4 yards per touch. I believe that's third best I believe it's second best, only behind Samaje Perine, ironically, another former Washington Commander. But Gibson has seen an increase in targets over the last 4 weeks that is directly correlated basically with the lack of sacks that Sam Howell has taken. Running back targets over that span have nearly doubled in Washington's offense, which I think is kind of how Howell is avoiding some of these sacks. He's looking for his check down options more. We know he's feeding Brian Robinson, who's running absurdly hot in the passing game. I think that's a gimmick, honestly, but he's still getting targets, so we know they're there. And then Gibson, again, 5, 5, 6, and then 4 last week. So the targets have increased for Washington running backs. The sacks have decreased for Howell. This is a game against the Dolphins this week where I would expect the Commanders' defense to give up probably 25 to 30 points. That's probably being generous even. Could be more than that. I don't expect Washington to ever be in a position where they can run the ball and hold any kind of a lead. And even if they can, the Commanders don't want to run the ball anyways. They're one of the highest teams in the league in pass rate over expected. Eric Bieniemy, come hell or high water, has chucked the ball with Sam Howell more times than any quarterback in the league. I think Josh Allen is second pass attempts, which is about 80 fewer, I think, or something like that than Sam Howell. It's insane. The Sam Howell pass volume. Hayden Winks tweeted earlier that Sam Howell is on pace for the 6th most pass attempts in NFL history. So Gibson, yeah, it's mind blowing. Gibson, any of these receivers, if they look their way, could be in line for a big fantasy day. I kind of like the way Washington's offense has evolved over these last few weeks, which has resulted in Gibson being fed and the yards from scrimmage ramping up a little bit. So a PPR scheme could very much be in play for Gibson against the Dolphins this week.
So I know this is a question about Gibson, in which you answered expertly, but we're going to shift this into Sam Howell. And we'll talk about Sam Howell right now. I do another local fantasy show here in Northeast Wisconsin, and one of my co-hosts pointed this out to me today, and I didn't realize this, Zach, and you probably already know. Sam freaking Howell is leading the NFL in passing yards right now. Leading more than Tagovailoa, more than Allen, more than Goff, Prescott, Mahomes, Herbert. The list goes on and on. Howell's first. And by the way, CJ Stroud is second on that list, which is also pretty surprising. I couldn't believe it. Where do you stand on Sam Howell going forward as a starting quarterback for you? We're going to get to the championship sprint here in a little bit with the Fantasy Pros Championship and the FFPC main event. Where do you stand on Sam Howell being a QB1 for you going through the rest of the season? Because he is putting up crazy town banana pants numbers right now.
He is. He's putting up just absurd numbers, certainly in the passing game. I already mentioned the Hayden Winks tweet, on pace for the 6th most pass attempts in history. Mm-hmm. You touched on just the fact that he's leading the league in passing yards, which we didn't see coming. The efficiency is not there for Hal. And I would say in a more normalized quarterback situation, we would care about that. But Hal right now in the season, the quarterback 10 at 21.3 fantasy points per game. If you're interested in total fantasy points, he's a quarterback 6 in total fantasy points. The volume has been very, very good for fantasy managers overall. And again, like I said, the Commanders, one of the top teams in the league in pass rate over expected. I believe they're third. They throw it a ton. Just, I mean, some of these numbers are just absolutely insane. The last, well, I'm not even going to tell you how many weeks. I'm just going to read these numbers off. Most recently against the Cowboys, 44 attempts. A week before that, 45. Week before that, 44, 45, 52. 42. So we're now on 6 straight weeks of Sam Howell attempting 40 or more passes in a game. And oh, by the way, a couple weeks before that, he also had a 41 pass game and a 51 pass game against the Bears. So I think Sam Howell has run into a situation where he plays on a terrible defense. They just fired their defensive coordinator, Jack Del Rio. I believe they're dead last in points allowed. They've allowed like 30 points per game in each of their last 4 or 5 weeks. It's not been good. And as if that's not good enough for a fantasy environment, which, that's another thing we talk about in the best ball community, is particularly is like fantasy environments and areas where we could see players thriving. Certainly one of the things that we will chase at times is defenses we think that may not be good. And as a result, some of these quarterbacks who are going later in drafts could have to throw more, which could result in fantasy points. Hal's getting that and more. He's getting a defense that is giving up points at an incredibly high rate. And he's got Eric Bieniemy, who, if he could, he would probably ban all running backs and just play 5 wide every week. So they throw it a ton. The schematics of the offense plus the dismal defense, I really think, is putting Hal in a position where he can just continue being a quarterback one for most weeks. And his biggest risk at blowing up in your face is probably just a down week, which we know happens to any quarterback on any given Sunday. Lamar Jackson looks like an MVP when he's throwing the ball between the hashes at times, but he can't find a fantasy point to save his life. We could talk about that a little bit too, but the environment has been good for Hal. I think it's going to continue. It's hard to find games where the Commanders are going to be favored in throughout the rest of the season, which I think is only going to result again in negative game scripts and a lot more passing, as if they already didn't want to throw the ball 40 times a game.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's unbelievable. And this guy, what was he, Zach? 4th round pick, Sam Howell, something like that?
5th round pick.
Which, I guess if your defense is terrible, you can kind of wake up and throw the ball to McLaurin, Dotson, Samuel, all these guys, Thomas, Robinson, the Gibson we just talked about. So there is something to be said for that. In the YouTube chat right now, Rubio is playing in an FFPC league. I assume main event, or it could be, something else. I don't know. But he has 3 quarterbacks on his team. One of them is Howell. He also has the league's second leading passer right now in CJ Stroud. He's also got Justin Fields. He's considering dropping Sam Howell to try to pick up like another running back or a player that could make a difference for him the rest of the way. Is that the smart call? I want to. It's difficult because we don't know the rest of his roster. But if you have to cut a quarterback, is Howell the one that you would cut in this case, keeping Stroud and keeping Fields? It's a Fantasy Pros League. So, no trading in this, Rubio, obviously, as you know. And he's loading up for the championship sprint, which is coming up in a couple of weeks here.
So my first word of advice would be to probably just check out the overall schedules at large for the remaining portion of the season. I don't have those in front of me. There again, I mentioned RotoViz earlier because RotoViz just has a bunch of sick tools. I'll pull this up real quick just for the sake of it. The strength of schedule streaming app that RotoViz has is going to help me answer this question here. I'm going to make sure we get week 18 out of here because no, seriously, just playing week 18. That's not for real. But so the top quarterback matchups that we've got per the app through week 13 the rest of the way, Denver, New York Jets, Dallas, Chicago. So Fields certainly case from there. The Saints, the Panthers, the Vikings, the 49ers, the Giants, and the Rams. There's your top 10 there. So Washington, interestingly enough, is dead last in the strength of schedule streaming app, which I can't believe it. But we also know, again, we just touched on the absurd volume that Washington is throwing at. How much is that going to matter? I don't know. I know he has a matchup against the Jets on tap in a couple of weeks. I know he gets the 49ers. Those are going to be tough. and the Cowboys, who we just saw him flop against. So I wouldn't feel great about how they're Chicago. I mentioned them, the fourth easiest schedule according to the app here. So who was the other quarterback? It was Fields, Howell,
CJ Stroud.
Stroud. I mean, yeah. So no one's dropping Stroud ever. Right. So if you were to drop one, I think that there's an argument to drop Howell. You hate giving up that kind of volume, knowing it's there and kind of in your back pocket. But I would also just ask. I weigh these questions. I'm sure everyone else does too. But given my roster, am I ever going to actually be in a position where I need to play this guy? I mean, if injuries happen, that's one thing. But I always like to assume full health. And the answer on how just kind of feels like a hard no. So I think you could probably drop Hal and add a little bit of juice somewhere else to prepare for the final few weeks.
Yeah, I think you made the case. Justin Fields has one of the best schedules remaining, and nobody can cut CJ Stroud at this point. So in what universe are you playing? Are you counting on Howell the rest of it? You can't play him in week 17, as our producer Tyler Soto points out, against the 49ers. You can't play him then. And Zach, you said he's got another game coming up against the Jets, right?
Yeah, so I just looked at the game by game here. So for what I'm considering the fantasy playoff stretch here is 15 to 16 or 15 to 17. I don't know if 14 is factored in here, but 15 the Rams, week 16 the Jets, week 17 the 49ers. That's a pretty tough 3-week stretch. The Rams, no one's taking them as seriously, but you're not going to want to play him against the Jets or the 49ers. Another thing that I heard on radio, because I listen to local radio all the time to get through my day. Grant Paulson of 106.7 The Fan, I'll give him credit here because I know he posted it. I think leading up to last week against the Cowboys, the Commanders had not faced a defense that ranks inside the top 10. Now they face several top 10 defenses the rest of the way. So some of these HAL numbers that we're seeing, you could argue against bottom half, maybe bottom third of the league defenses in some cases. And now the Commanders' offense is going to get a little bit more into the teeth of their schedule, and it's going to be more on how to show that not only he is the guy, because he's still working that one out, but that he can be the guy against some top-tier defenses. And against the Jets and 49ers, he's going to have to prove it. And if he doesn't, it could potentially cost you a fantasy championship in one of those big weeks. So something else to keep in mind as well.
I think that's a great point. And what this all boils down to, Rubio, who's giving us the clinking beer glasses of thanks in the YouTube chat, which we appreciate. Sam Howell, there you go. Sam Howell is a guy that you, in that scenario, you could feel okay cutting him with those other two quarterbacks on your team and with Howell's upcoming schedule. We have gone to our first commercial break here of the Thursday night game tonight. The Cowboys marched down the field, had it first and goal inside the 10. However, the Seattle defense held strong. Brandon Aubrey just kicked a 30-yard field goal to make it 3-0 Seattle as we march forward through that game tonight. We'll be here with you at least through the first quarter, maybe a little bit more. Keaton Mitchell. Zach, let's talk about this guy. There was a blurb actually on Roto World from Jeff, and I'm going to butcher his name, covers the Ravens. Zrebic?
Yeah, Jeff Zrebic, I believe.
Zrebic, thank you. He reported, Todd Monken said that the team's getting more comfortable with Keaton Mitchell in several different personnel groupings. Now, in addition to starting the game in week 12, which he's never done all season long, 46% of the offensive snaps, 9 rush attempts, that was most for Ravens running backs, 64 rushing yards, 11 total touches. He had a 20-plus yard run in each of his last 4 games. He's averaging 9.7 yards per touch this season. They get the bye this week, as we talked about earlier with Baltimore. So now you have an opportunity to really get him involved into all the minutia that you want to run if you're Todd Monken with the Baltimore Ravens offense. I had a couple of times starting on the same team. I've started Gus Edwards and Keaton Mitchell because I didn't really have another option. Now going forward, I think that you have to look at this from the standpoint, this could be Keaton Mitchell's backfield, and Gus Edwards is a guy that maybe gets short yardage, maybe gets goal line, but Keaton Mitchell is your meal ticket. Zach Kruger, where do you stand on Keaton Mitchell?
Well, let me show you something real quick here. We got East Carolina,
the Pirates. Yep.
Hat, which was purchased in anticipation of Keaton Mitchell's season a couple of weeks ago. So I have worn this hat like a fool because I am one of the biggest Keaton Mitchell fans. I've been touting him dating back to just before, like late December. I had written an article on him last year, I think, about as a guy who I thought, first of all, I think Mitchell should have been drafted in like the 3rd or 4th round of drafts. If you look at some of his numbers, I wrote an article on it a couple of weeks ago after his breakout. I did a little bit of a blind running back test, and yes, it's a difference in conferences. Mitchell playing at East Carolina and the AAC or whatever it is, and then Devon Achane playing in the SEC. I realize there's a difference, but if you just look at the overall efficiency metrics of the two players, who check out nearly the same in height, weight, and size, and speed. Mitchell a 4.37 40-yard dash, Achane a 4.32 if I remember correctly. So the size and the overall speed of these players are both very similar. Mitchell actually tested as a better athlete overall at the combine. His relative athletic score is somewhere over 9. Achane's fall a little bit below that. So Mitchell even tests as a better athlete. But if Achane can get drafted in the 3rd round of drafts, I don't see how Mitchell managed to go the whole entire draft without getting selected there. Two similar players, both speed threats, both big play abilities, but now he's the Ravens unpolished gem that they can now start to slowly get more involved. I like that blurb that you read. It was a very well written blurb. I'm biased as a writer of it.
I was gonna say yes.
But good work. I'm glad you liked it. Thank you. But yeah, Mitchell has been insane these last few weeks. I'm looking at his numbers here: 7.48 yards after contact per attempt, 13 missed tackles forced on 29 rushing yards. I know that's not quite 50%, but I know it's a very high number that I just can't quite work out in my head. But and then you mentioned as well a run of 20 plus yards each of the last, it was 3 or 4 weeks. My concern with Mitchell, and I hate that it continues to be a concern, and I would really like for John Harbaugh to give me reason to believe I don't have to be worried about it anymore. My concern with him is that even in a week where he was the starter, the rush attempts still matched kind of what we've seen these last few weeks, where I was kind of saying like, yeah, you can play Keaton Mitchell if you want to, but he, 8 carries, 9 carries, not exactly a big workload. And we know the Ravens don't pass the ball to their running backs. That's been one of my biggest gripes over the last several years. The Ravens are consistently at the bottom of the league in running back targets. Mitchell had 2 receptions, I believe it was, this last game. 2 catches for 25 yards against the Chargers. The passing volume isn't there and really hasn't been there for him, even during this mini breakout. So I love the snap share. I love the fact that he certainly looked like the guy in terms of, 9 carries, led the backfield and rush attempts. Gus Edwards still had 8. Justice Hill with 5. For some reason, they're still playing him. We're looking into why that's the case. But I love Keaton Mitchell, the player. He needs to get more rush attempts. I love that quote from Todd Monken that really is kind of going to be what I'm going to be hanging my hat on when I'm starting Mitchell next week and on teams where I have Jonathan Taylor. I'm going to be hanging my hat on my ECU hat. I'm going to be hanging on the hope that Todd Monken is serious about playing him more and more and getting him more integrated in the offense. And if that happens, I think the sky's the limit for him. We've got no reason to believe otherwise based on his numbers through the last 3 or 4 weeks of the season. So it's been great. But I still, like, in the back of my brain, making sure I'm using caution when it comes to who I'm considering playing him over, because this is not a running back who has had some of the volume that we have seen from other guys who I feel questions about. I had people ask me a few weeks ago, do I play Keaton Mitchell over Rachaad White? Respectfully, no, do not do that. Rachaad White is basically the only running back in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers backfield. He gets an absurd amount of targets. He runs an absurd amount of routes, all tops in the league. Don't play him over them. Mitchell's exciting. He's explosive. Even someone like Ramondre Stevenson averaging over almost 16 opportunities per game. Mitchell hasn't had 16 opportunities once during this breakout. So I'm excited about him, but I'm still tempering expectations depending on who I have on my roster, realizing that if I'm playing him, I could be fading someone at higher volume, and I need to properly weigh where I value Mitchell and his week-to-week matchup. And is he going to thrive on efficiency, which he has for a good portion of this breakout, or should I ride with a guy who might get more yards, more checkdowns, especially in PPR leagues? There's probably value to be had over him in leagues like that. I hope I'm explaining this and making.
You are. I think
I don't want to sound like someone who's like backing off a guy. I'm telling you, I love the hell out of.
No, but I think like us as fantasy players, especially high stakes fantasy players, we see this and we're like, oh my God, wheels up, league winner Keaton Mitchell. But I think, as you pointed out, and you've given us several reasons, there is a more nuanced approach to Mitchell v. Edwards v. everybody else on your roster too, all your running backs. When you consider that, Keaton Mitchell could get it done from you, but you have to consider the matchup. You have to consider the other players that you are benching in favor of starting Mitchell. Might not be all gumdrops and lollipops or whatever the saying is for Mitchell going forward, but it could.
Yeah, and I still. He's gotten more work in the red zone. That's actually something I should look into. But I feel like even if he's getting more work in the red zone, I really have a hard time believing the Ravens are going to back off the Gus Edwards goal line role,
right?
Which has really helped Edwards obviously get to where he has this fantasy season. Where the fact that he doesn't have a single 100-yard rushing game on his resume and doesn't catch passes, Gus Edwards has really saved what would be an otherwise pretty average fantasy season by falling forward into the end zone. I think it's like 9 times this year or something like that. Like the Gus Edwards goal line role, which has left me wildly frustrated because I've pretty much written about and faded him and said this is a feast or famine running back. And despite what I think is the correct assessment on that, he's been feasting so much that I feel like a moron every time I bet against him. But I think that the Gus Edwards role, regardless of how much more we see out of Keaton Mitchell, I think that goal line role is going to continue to exist, and that'll be frustrating for Keaton Mitchell owners at times.
I think he's sort of like great value late career Jerome Bettis, Gus Edwards, like the Jerome, the Gus or the bus in Pittsburgh is sort of like what you're looking at with Gus Edwards. The game for Amazon has gone to another ad break. 72-yard touchdown for DK Metcalf. Unbelievable.
So the over hit.
He hit the over, yeah. Now, the thing is with this, it wasn't like a bomb. It was just basically, I want to say roughly like a 15-yard pass, sort of over the middle. He got behind Deron Bland and the safety for Dallas and just outran him. It was a pretty impressive athletic play on that. So the Seahawks, after Jason Myers bangs the extra point through, 7-3 is where they're leading at just under 8 minutes to go in the first quarter there. We have just under 25 minutes to go on this show. We're going to step out and take our final break. When we come back, we're going to talk about your start sit questions, the ones that you've already had for us tonight. We're going to get into Christian Watson a little bit. We're going to get into Gardner Minshew and maybe a little Jawan Johnson. If you're all well behaved, which you have been so far tonight, that is coming up here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Fantasy Football Night in America on the Better Sports Network. He's Zach Kruger. I'm Eric Balkman. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back in a flash.
What can we expect from you out there on the track tonight?
Listen, I have a wife, 2 kids. I have, full-time jobs. I'm never nervous. I don't even know what that word means. Can you explain what nervous means? No. I'm ready to have fun. I've never done anything like this before. I got asked to be a part of this. This is fascinating. Like, it's so cool to just look around and see what goes on here. So I'm just excited to get out on the horse. And you want trash talk? Is that what you're asking me for? No trash talk. I hope everyone does well.
All right. Everyone's going to do well, but it has to be a winner. So give me your trifecta. Who's going to come in first, second, and third? Heat.
I will go Maria 1, me 2, Willie 3, Moose goes 4th.
Well, it's very simple. I won this event last year. I won my heat, and so the defending champ has to be the favorite. Now, that makes me a little nervous just because I feel like it's hard to repeat. There's a little pressure when you're the favorite, but that being said, I'm still optimistic.
So your heat, it's you,
yes.
Moose and Keith from Better Sports Network, and Willie Colon.
I think Keith might be my stiffest competition, and I asked for this because I actually recruited Keith, if you didn't know. So Keith, if you win, you're welcome.
Malusis is very good. I mean, he knows what he's doing, but I'm going to go with Maria.
Keith is waving to the crowd. He must pay attention because they're off. It's Mark Malusis going for the lead. Maria Marino on the outside, and now Keith Irizarry on the outside with speed, and they're 3 wide into the first turn. Woo! Mark Malusis is locked in for his life. 138 and 2. They're into the stretch. Sportscasters Derby 2. And still in front, Keith Irizarry. And now Mark Malusis is trying to squeeze on through.
Come on! Hey! Come on! Let's go! Come on, dig it! Dig it! Yeah!
Irizarry. Keith, you did it all the way, wire to wire, over Mark Malusis.
Awesome! That was so cool.
The champ is here. Keith, what was it like being out there? Adrenaline rush. You were doing the Instagram live, so there was no panic. You looked cool, calm, collected the whole time, and you won it.
I felt really comfortable. I did. Like, I know you were joking with me before. Are you nervous? Are you whatever? What are you? David, the driver, was awesome. He's like, we're gonna win this. I said, all right, let's win this. And he said, let's go. Yeah, I just felt really comfortable. I did. It was fun. We're in the lead. I got Maria Marino on the right side of me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, she's gonna beat us, right? And then out of nowhere, you see Moose coming up this way, and we feel him breathing down our neck. And I'm like,
Moose
no!
on the loose. Watch out.
Moose was definitely on the loose, and we just got Moose by a neck, a nose, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, but again, all of this for a great cause, and it was absolutely awesome to do this. It was cool.
All right, Keith, congratulations. And no matter what, you could always hold this over Moose's head.
If you were looking for a fantastic Thursday night football game, you may have found it. Welcome back to the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show right here on the Better Sports Network. Eric Balkman, Zach Kruger from Roto World coming at you. The Cowboys, it took them 2 minutes and 40 seconds. They have come down in 5 plays and hits Dak Prescott hits CeeDee Lamb for roughly, I don't know, about a 15, 20-yard touchdown or so. They have now taken back the lead. They are now up 10-7. Once again, CeeDee Lamb getting the touchdown here from Dak Prescott. Let's discuss the Fantasy Alarm All-Pro subscription before we get into starter sits. Remember, you can get that Fantasy Alarm All-Pro subscription, unlocking all the content for all sports, including annual draft guides, one-on-one expert access in the Discord. You can analyze matchups and trends in your leagues with the League Sync capability. Integrated with Fanjections is the lineup generator, I should say. Daily rankings, weekly rankings, the value vault, the position coaches are all there. Waiver wire ownership percentages, projection stats, and tools at your disposal. Build better lineups guaranteed. Get access to everything Fantasy Alarm offers all year. Use promo code LOCK at fantasyalarm.com/lock. Promo code LOCK, LOCK. Rubio chiming in, Zach, on YouTube right now. This may be the best Thursday night football game so far. And certainly it's been exciting. You know, all 3 drives have ended in scores. This might go over 47.5. And honestly, with the first week of the Fantasy Pros Championship and the FFPC Main Event League playoffs going off tonight, there's going to be a lot of people that are excited about a lot of points tonight. And I think we're all for it. Thursday night football kind of gets a bad rap. Every once in a while, we stumble into a great game. I think about the DJ Moore Commanders game, whenever that was, about a month and a half or so ago, when Moore had like 3 touchdowns, essentially like 10 minutes into the game. It was crazy. We might be seeing another crazy game tonight.
That was great for at least one half of the team and the team in that game. I was hanging out with the good Denny Carter for that game. Actually,
Sure.
He lives right up the road from me, so every once in a while, Denny and I'll catch a game over some wings and beer. We watched the Chicago Bears stomp the Washington Commanders in a local, not Commanders bar, but everyone out here is Commanders fans, so local bar. And DJ Moore certainly destroyed them there. I will say this here. Hey, we got Dak at 97 yards already, CeeDee Lamb at 46. We already have egg on our face as far as as far as Metcalf goes, and maybe Geno, but we also have 2 of our picks that are pacing in the right direction. And Zach Charbonnet, 7 rushing yards. I mean, what do we need? 27 more yards and we hit that?
27 would get it. 27 would get it. Yep.
Let's ride. So I mean, good Thursday night game so far. We got a couple things working in our favor.
Speaking of the Commanders, let's get into some lineup advice that you will offer the viewers, and we'll discuss it here. For anybody who's considering Curtis Samuel versus Christian Watson this week, we kind of talked a lot about Samuel and that Commanders offense. In fact, I think, let's just get into the Christian Watson aspect. I am seeing the Packers do a lot of getting Jaden Reed involved with plays right at or behind the line of scrimmage, similar to what we saw with Christian Watson last year. Have not seen as much of it with Watson this year, and I think that creates a lower floor for him. We saw, I don't want to say a ceiling game from him this past Thanksgiving against Detroit, but certainly his best game of the season. If you had to start one of these guys, would it be Curtis Samuel this week, or would it be Christian Watson for you, Zach?
So Jaden Reed is an interesting one, and part of the reason that I'm going with my pick here. Jaden Reed, I believe, missed practice each of the last 2 days. In Blurb Country, we're saying that's trending down towards playing this week. So he's still got tomorrow to clear and maybe get in a limited session, which would change the outlook. But 2 days so far of no practices for Jaden Reed. I believe it's a chest injury, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, correct. Yes.
And then Curtis Samuel last week, 12 targets, insane, season high for him, 100 yards, season high, insane, 9 receptions, season high, insane. Also, all of that, it's so insane because it's an outlier. And while I do, I like the Commanders players, some of them certainly in this match against the Dolphins, I think I'm going to go ahead and go with Christian Watson. You mentioned kind of his ceiling game last week against the Lions, 7 targets on the day, 5 catches, 94 yards. And a touchdown. The one catch I remember was like right off the bat. It was a really long one, but 7 targets. That's a number that he's hit 3 times, and he also has an 8 target week. So 4 games of 7 or more targets. And it's against the Chiefs, if I'm not mistaken, this week, which I certainly like for the Packers.
I'll actually be at that game. Probably not with Taylor Swift, but I'll be at Lambeau Field to take that in person. Very excited.
Well, hey, you never know. If you turn into a star tight end at any point in time during the game, you might have a chance. But yeah, I like Watson in this game, especially with Reed out. I think it's a game that could certainly turn into another game where the Packers are throwing to keep pace. Also, another brutal part of the Packers break so far, Aaron Jones just cannot get healthy. 2 back-to-back DNPs to start this week, almost certainly trending towards missing another game with the sprained MCL. AJ Dillon is a guy who, outside of the volume that he's probably going to be providing fantasy managers this week, he's not someone who I'm counting on to break off enough big plays to keep the Packers in this one if the Mahomes offense breaks out. So I think there could be a scenario where the Packers are once again passing at a pretty decent clip, and Christian Watson, especially with Reed out, is possibly on track for another decent day as far as targets and volume go.
Matt LaFleur said today that if Reed gets in a limited practice tomorrow, he'll probably be active on Sunday. But if he doesn't, I mean, then all of a sudden we have to reevaluate Christian Watson. Rubio wants to know, Reed isn't officially out yet, correct? No, he is not officially out yet. But I can guarantee you this: if he doesn't practice tomorrow, he'll be officially out pretty shortly after that. Let's get to tight ends here. Interesting thing last week happened, and I don't know if this affected you, Zach, or anybody else, but I got the blurb on my phone, not the blurb.
Oh, yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah, I know what you're going to say.
Higby's inactive. So I'm like, oh, my God. So I checked all my leagues, and I didn't have Higbee going anywhere. So I'm like, great. But then like a few minutes after that, that's a mistake. Higbee's actually active. I wonder how many people had already gone to wherever they're going to go to watch the games and left Higbee on their bench, who scored 2 touchdowns this past week. Matthew Stafford looked awesome for the Rams, seemingly throwing to everybody except Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. Higbee was great. Kyron Williams was great. Everybody was great on that team this past week. When you consider what you're doing this week for tight end, and we'll go assume tight end premium scoring here for the FFPC. If you have a choice between Tyler Higbee at home against the tough Browns defense, would you play him over Jonnu Smith, who's also going up against a tough defense? He'll be at MetLife Stadium against the New York Jets.
Yeah, so Jonnu Smith is tough because he had kind of, popped up early on the fantasy radar unexpectedly. No targets in week 1, then 6, 8, 6, 7, 5. And we were weirdly starting either Kyle Pitts or Jonnu Smith if we had them in fantasy. And because it's such a wasteland at the position, both are kind of working out. The last 2 weeks, Jonnu Smith has been targeted a grand total of 2 times. He has 1 catch for 1 yard. And even the week before that, if I'm not mistaken, he had 5 catches for 100 yards and a touchdown, which looks really, really great. But he had like an insanely long screen pass for a touchdown in that week, if I'm not mistaken, which really offset an otherwise underwhelming week from there too. So I would argue, even though his big week 9 is what it was, and even week 8, one target. So it's not been great for him really as of late. He had a lucky play where he scored on a long touchdown, but Jonnu Smith I think is kind of trending towards being off the fantasy radar. Drake London is healthy. We saw Bijan Robinson get more involved last week, which is crazy to think that at week 13 or whatever it is we're talking about, beat John Robinson, needing to get more involved in a Falcons offense. But that's how Arthur Smith has rolled this year. And with Drake London healthy, Bijan getting more involved, and then Kyle Pitts still theoretically the tight end one there. I'm fading Smith off of that alone, and I'm going with Higbee, who has a challenging matchup against the Browns. The Browns have been stout against tight ends for most of the season, but I'd at least take the guy who I feel like could maybe fall into some volume, which really just hasn't been there for Smith. If you're betting on Smith, you're betting on a guy hitting who has seen 2 or fewer targets in 3 of his last 4 games.
Yeah, and certainly that's not a bet that you want to make. Again, with every decision you make, it's getting exponentially more and more impactful on how your fantasy season is going to end. And I don't know if you want to be betting on Jonnu Smith that way. I can't remember which league this was, Zach, but one of my I know what league it is. I have one quarterback on my team. It's Lamar Jackson. I had to pick up somebody this week, and it is the incomparable Gardner Minshew, who is going to be getting the start for me in that league. He goes to Tennessee this week, but if I would have another option, as some other people would you play Jared Goff in the Big Easy over Gardner Minshew? Things to consider. Jared Goff is trending downward right now. He's still got the weapons, and the Lions offense I still really like, but I don't know what's been with his play, with his penchant for turning the ball over the last couple of weeks. You're looking at Goff versus Minshew in week 13. Which one are you going with at quarterback?
So I will just say real quick, the Titans are allowing the 12th most fantasy points to quarterbacks over the last 2 weeks. We certainly like that. Gardner Minshew had a top 15 finish just this past week against Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 17.2 fantasy points, 41 pass attempts. Really a high volume day for Minshew as far as pass attempts goes. He's only cleared 40 pass attempts, it looks like, on 4 times this season. And we know that the Colts like to run the ball a lot. So in games where they're winning, that's probably kind of going to be what they're going to lean on. And that's why Zach Moss, who we talked about earlier, is going to have a lot of positive outlooks. A couple interesting notes from Minshew. 1 touchdown pass over the last 3 weeks. Not exactly something we're looking for there. And then he has a rushing touchdown, which he had last week against the Bucs as well, which helped carry him there. But Minshew has been trending pretty much as a quarterback 2 for much of the season, sometimes even a quarterback 3, as was the case in that Germany matchup against the Patriots. As much as I love Minshew mania and everything he just represents as a zany, quarterback who just steps in and balls out and has his team in the midst of a playoff hunt, I think I would still be tempted to go with Jared Goff, this week against the Saints. Saints allowing the 14th most fantasy points per game over the last 5 weeks to quarterback. That's not a number to sleep on. Even for the week that he had this past week against the Packers where they lost, Jared Goff still wound up saving himself with a pretty decent fantasy day, which is all we care about here. We don't care about some of the gross plays that take place within the games. I need you to get me enough points to win my week, and Jared Goff did that against the Packers. Finishes the overall quarterback 7. It's a second top 10 finish in the last 3 weeks. And the Saints are allowing enough points to quarterbacks where I think that he'd be able to get this done. He still, we know, has elite weapons in Monroe St. Brown. Sam Laporta has come on big really all season long, kind of bucking that hole. It takes a couple years for a tight end to break out. Trent Laporta is been great as far as fantasy is concerned. And I really like the way that they've kind of gotten Jahmyr Gibbs more involved with the offense overall as well, especially with David Montgomery being out. I think Dan Campbell kind of got a chance to look at it, really see what they had in him. And Jahmyr Gibbs over the last few weeks has also had very favorable fantasy games, which I think is, in part a direct result of Goff and what he's been able to do with him in the passing game. So I like Goff this week against the Saints. It doesn't look like a sexy game on paper that's going to feature a ton of points. Derek Carr hasn't been great, but the Lions continue to be a team that is letting Goff throw at a decent rate, and for better or worse, he's more or less capitalized on it from a fantasy perspective.
Capitalizing from a fantasy perspective tonight has been DK Metcalf. My God. So I'll say this right now. I'll bury the lead. The Seattle Seahawks ended up driving down, and it was a missed 42-yard field goal by Jason Myers after the drive stalled. So you are looking at 10-7 Seattle, but DK Metcalf caught another long pass on this drive off Deron Bland. Metcalf now 2 catches for 107 yards and a touchdown. Geno Smith up to 123 yards, which is crazy. I mean, so Geno Smith, outside of those 2 catches from DK Metcalf, is 3 of 4 for what, 16 yards? But you got to count them all the same, and we're counting them all the same tonight. as Metcalf is wrecking it. Cowboys getting the ball back here with pretty good field position. Just under a minute to go in the first quarter. We haven't talked running backs here in the starter sits. Let's get into that a little bit. James Conner versus Jerome Ford. We touched on Conner a little bit when we were talking about Michael Carter, but he goes to Pittsburgh this week. Jerome Ford is at the Los Angeles Rams. If you could only pick one of those guys for either a flex spot or your second running back slot this week, Zach, would you be rolling with Conner despite the matchup, or does Ford make an entrance here for you over Conner?
So we are talking about two backs who are pretty much, I think we could agree, are the bell cow backs of their offense. The volume has tended to be there for each of them. James Conner has had a brutal fantasy season. Just rattling off. So his first 3 weeks, double-digit fantasy points every week, 12, 16.6, 19.6. That's why we drafted James Conner. Since then has been all the reasons that we faded James Conner. 6.6 PPR, 4.6, 9.3, 8.3, 7.2. He has 2 weeks where he had 0 targets, which is almost insane to think about because we know that's always been like a staple in his game. He doesn't just get the rush attempts, but he also gets the targets. That's kind of the whole idea of being a bell cow. And then this past week, 27 yards on 6 carries, and then 5 yards on 4 receptions. It's been bad for James Conner. He's not a young running back. I'm not sure exactly his age, but he's definitely past the age apex where we start to see running backs decline. And I think I'd say I'm legitimately concerned that this might be happening, and it's shown up in fantasy. Now, on the other hand, you have Jerome Ford, double-digit fantasy points each of his last 4 weeks, 8 double-digit fantasy performances overall in this season. I came out pretty hard against James Cook, and I did not add him on waivers or anything after the Nick Chubb injury because I said he's breaking off a lot of big plays, and on the larger scale sample size, he's averaging 2 yards per carry. But the volume has been there for him. He's been a top 24 fantasy back each of the last 4 weeks, and he's doing what James Conner's not doing. He's seeing targets, and he's also getting looks on the ground, being efficient with it. So I would be going with Ford here because again. Both running backs getting volume, both treated as a bell cow. One of them is producing exponentially better than the other. Unless James Conner finds a fountain of youth in a revenge game against the Steelers, I think I'd feel pretty comfortable going with Ford here and fading Conner.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you, and this is actually a decision I have to make in one of my leagues. So I had Ford in there over Conner, and I'm probably going to keep it that way now that I got the confirmation from you. Let's wrap up tonight with another question from Chris Lute in the YouTube chat. Zach, I'm desperate, very, very, very desperate. In my RB2 spot, I have to play one of these guys. Ezekiel Elliott, who is at home against the Chargers. Jeff Wilson this week, who is getting the Commanders at our nation's capital. And then Miley Cyrus Sanders. I was like, who's Miley Cyrus? Miles Sanders at Tampa this week as well. Elliott's battling the injury right now. I think it was a hamstring. I could be wrong. I'd have to look that back up. I think I like Sanders best out of this, but, this is not great. I don't like any of these guys, really. I would lean towards Sanders here. He says if Achane is out, he's thinking Jeff Wilson, which would make sense. If Achane doesn't play, I think Jeff Wilson's probably the play here. What say you, Zach? How would you handicap this? How do you look at this?
Yeah, thigh injury for Zeke, but you're in the vicinity of the leg, so I give you credit for it. You get all the credit in the world for that one. Yeah, Elliott's off my Elliott. I haven't drafted Ezekiel Elliott once this year. He's not a guy I wanted, so he's certainly not a guy who I'm playing. It would be Sanders for me, I think, but you did point out Achane if he sits. I would probably consider pivoting to Jeff Wilson. Then we did see him get a little bit of work this past week against the Jets. I think Jeff Wilson had 73 yards from scrimmage, surprisingly. It wasn't. Yeah. He kind of popped off and actually got some looks and looked good and efficient on the ground with the opportunities he did have. So I would agree with that. Wilson, if no Achane. If Achane plays, I would go with Sanders. And good luck to you. That's a tough one to be in. But yeah, I'm with you on the line.
6 teams on bye. I haven't looked closely at a lot of my teams, but I know I'm probably not in the worst shape or in the best shape either at my running back position this week. Zach, we have a little bit less than a minute to go. Before we let you go, I've been plugging it all night. At ZK_FFB on X. And of course, check out all your work at rotoworld.com. Is that the best 2 places to consume your content? I know you do some other stuff as well.
Yeah, no, it's all Roto World now. So Roto World, you can catch me on the Sunday recap show that drops every Monday morning as well with games that I cover. And then rotoworld.com, I have 2 weekly articles coming out, Snap Report on Wednesdays, and Expected Points article on Friday, which I'll be writing as soon as we get off here because I have a Christmas parade to head to tomorrow and I got to get myself together. So busy night for me. It's just getting started. But yeah, Roto World at Twitter on ZK_FFB.
Well, we appreciate it, Zach. Thank you so much for coming on tonight, man.
Yeah, no, happy to be on. It always a blast.
It's always fun, too. It's always fun to play the FFPC Weekly Challenge. Check that out at myffpc.com, myffpc.com. Enter for as little as $35 and win up to $2,500. Next Thursday, 7 o'clock Eastern Time, Dave Kluge from Football Guys will guest co-host with me. Shout out to Zach Kruger. Shout out to Tyler Soto. Enjoy the rest of the game. Best of the Better Sports Network is up next.